mission affects the world?
It's a consciousness shift. You have to start small.
I love that.
And there's this microcosm and then there's the macrocosm.
Yes.
And consciousness shift changes in very tiny, it starts with tiny, your elements of fire, tinder, kindling, and fuel. It's got to start with the tinders, and then
Hello everybody, I'm Matt Ward and I'm your host for the first ever episode of the Conservation Journal. The purpose of the Conservation Journal is to introduce you to the pioneers and leaders in the conservation world in hopes that they can educate and inspire you to get involved in conservation on your own. Now, today's guest is a good friend of mine who I've had the pleasure of working with and having attend one of my expeditions. She was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and went down a more traditional path that a lot of you are probably familiar with motherhood and college. But that didn't stop her from being one of the only people to say that they can summit 7 of Colorado's 14,000-foot mountains. That led her into pursuing her mission to inspire people to enjoy, value, and protect the natural legacy of the South, which led her to begin volunteering for the Wild South organization in 2009, putting in a total of 5 years of pure volunteer hours, then being hired by the company to coordinate their volunteers. This is a statement of her true dedication, passion, and competency in conservation. In addition to that, she spends her free time gardening and birding, which just speaks to her authenticity. And I've personally seen her go out of her way and sleep in a van in order to attend conservation organizations, help with cleanups, and go forward with these conservation efforts. So please, help me in welcoming to the first episode ever, Kim Waits. Hey, welcome.
Hey, Matt.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good. All right, so I know who you are. Tell us how you got started in the conservation effort.
Very interesting journey. When my son was in high school, going back to that whole motherhood theme, he started feeling that detachment of my child is getting older and now
Right.
what do I do? And I'd always flirted around with the idea of being outdoorsy and wanted to go outside, and so I thought it was nigh time to start following that passion, and I started getting on hikes and dabbling in rock climbing and other
I'm with
pursuits.
you on the rock climbing. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm definitely with you.
I
Still
can't
climbing
do it
sometimes.
anymore, but
Nonsense.
it was one of my
I'd put
favorite
you on
things.
both.
Yeah, I've been back and forth with that, but falling in love with that
Yeah.
made me want to start giving back to these places that basically helped form this broader sense of identity outside of motherhood. I really, really enjoyed what I did, and then I saw other people volunteering. I was like, that's a pretty nifty concept,
Right.
being able to enjoy the outdoors and then also turn around and give back to these places. So I started exploring these ideas of conservation and learning about Leave No Trace and learning about the environment. And
you were a Leave No Trace instructor,
Master
right?
educator.
Master educator.
Yes.
And Leave No Trace. I should have included that in your intro.
That's okay.
I'll have to get that down next time.
Absolutely.
So obviously, anybody who's worked in the outdoors world or in conservation knows that there's not a lot of money going around in the conservation effort. With that, we face that challenge, and then there are other challenges that we face, like spending 10 hours outdoor on a trail, working, doing manual labor to do trail cleanups and things like this. So when you're facing these challenges, would you say that, and obviously you've persevered, would you say that it was your hunger for what you were doing and that passion to protect that kept you going on those hard days, or would you say that it was your devotion, more of a personal self, personal note, your devotion to doing what you're doing regardless of what you're experiencing?
A little bit of both. I've always had a tremendous sense of duty to something, and once I think it, I feel like I have to manifest it, and I have to devote myself to an idea or a concept, and following through with things that I'm passionate about and committed to is extremely important to me. So
I want to go down that rabbit hole.
yes.
So is that something that's always been that way? Is that naturally, or is that something you developed?
On a personal level,
Whether
you know,
conservation or not, you know, that
I-
the level of level of devoting yourself to your work, is that
when you speak to my family or friends that know me all my life, I've never been normal, and I've always been.
that's why we get along.
I know, right? And I do. I've been this way for a very long time. You know, growing up non-traditionally and just having big ideas.
Yeah.
My parents would say that I used to just space out
Right.
and stare out the window, and so I was somewhere off in my head thinking about things. You know, so it followed me into adulthood.
Yeah.
And there was a while where I was, you know, sowing my wild oats.
Naturally.
You know,
So
I
I'm not gonna
didn't.
make you get into that on camera, but
Oh no, I did not go through the traditional formula of getting out of high school and then going to college and then getting married and having 2.5 children and a white picket fence. That was the American dream. Was not me, and I kind of carved my own.
right. Because
Space
who
in
climbs
life.
7 mountains in Colorado? How was that, by the way?
It was tremendous.
Tremendous.
Well,
That's a good word.
one of the at 14,000 feet or more of tremendous.
Right.
So one of them, Mount Quandary, I actually summited several different times, did a winter ascent, but also volunteered for a mountain rescue team while I was there and got to experience that mountain in more ways than just fun. It was also mission driven to go get people who literally got themselves in a quandary on Quandary.
Right.
But then when I moved to Colorado, I had set a goal. I was going to climb all 54 or 56 or how, depending on who you speak with. There's kind of a debate of, you know, what an actual 14er is in some
Right.
circles.
For those
yeah,
who don't know,
I-
in the mountain climbing world, a 14er is like it's the standard. It's a baseline, right?
Correct.
Right? Yeah. It's like
it's a 14,000
Foot
foot or more
mountain,
elevation.
yeah. So it's just like it's that new level. It's that next level. It's a
Yeah.
badge almost. You know,
Oh
like,
yeah,
hey, I
yeah.
hit the
And there are
14er.
13ers, but there are 12ers. There, you
Yeah.
know, 14ers are kind of, that was the culture there. It's
Yeah.
getting there and climbing all of them,
Right.
which I never did, but I still did 7.
7, which is more than a lot of people can say, especially since you were raised in Birmingham, Alabama, which I happen to know the tallest mountain in Alabama is 2,000 feet.
That's
So-
our mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that are getting into this, and I think this is, you know, I love seeing that trait in you and that you brought it up, and it delves a little bit away from conservation, so I won't go too far down that tangent. But the ability to devote yourself to your work in such a passion and driven way is probably why a lot of people don't go after their dreams, and especially those in dreams that are more difficult to pursue, like conservation, because there's very little monetary reward. You face a lot of, you know, three-dimensional challenges, like, you know, where am I going to live? How am I going to pay my bills? You know, how can I devote all of my time to this when it doesn't, you know, sustain me, and these things like that a lot of people have run into. So for the viewers, how would you suggest that they kind of cultivate that drive that you seem to
Well,
have?
understandably, people get in this, what's the word, is this duality of, oh, well, I have to be responsible and I have to do this 9-to-5 job and I have to, you know, there's all these real-time frontline responsibilities that we have in this life, and then we have this dreamer world, you know, that I've been
That I
staring,
frequently live
I've
in
been
myself.
staring out the window, like, I know a lot of, especially some of the volunteers that I manage that do 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, and they live for the weekend.
Mhm.
And that's actually how I started, to go off on a little tangent, in volunteering. I had a house cleaning business that I had started myself in Birmingham. I had 26 clients. I worked Monday through Friday. I killed my back. I scrubbed crappy toilets, but I lived for the weekend for my volunteer work and getting outside. And I used to say that this stuff feeds my pocketbook, but this stuff feeds my soul.
Right.
The weekend stuff. Finding that balance, I think, is basically the answer to your question.
Yeah.
Is ultimately the key. Because I know some people can't just shirk everything and walk out of their responsibilities and go hike the Appalachian Trail or whatever it is that they're dreaming about that day. It is finding that balance for sure. In my case, getting actually hired to do basically what I love to do and turn that into kind of a financial, sustainable, that is the, some people say the secret of life is getting paid to do what you love.
Right.
There's some interesting dynamics with that in trying to be altruistic and also getting a paycheck.
Right.
Sometimes when it becomes transactional, it does become a little bit different.
Do you feel like you lose the authenticity?
Not really, because I still try and cultivate that authenticity I do still do volunteer work.
Okay. Yeah, so you stay true to that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are times when I work over my 40 hours and I'm putting down volunteer hours for myself, for my organization. I'm
right.
working 60 hours a week, 40 hours on record, 20 hours, I'm still putting in volunteers.
Service. Okay, perfect. Yeah. I'm actually going to use that because I kind of am going down the same route. I came to Huntsville with a skill set in the outdoors, and I went to everybody that I could meet and said, this is what I'm about and this is what I want to do. And everybody's like, that's a really great idea, but we don't do that here. And it was the same answer I got, so I started my own business, and that's how Alpha Expeditions started.
Good.
And so making sure that I stay true to myself in that, I love inspiring people and helping them in the outdoors. I don't want to be the guy who cuts somebody off for, lack of a dime. But also, I gotta eat, and so it's that where do we draw the line between that bread and butter? So I think the importance is to not get greedy with it is where I would go with that. But to my next question, I am a huge team person. Yes. Teamwork, I'm very team oriented, I'm very pack oriented. You see it all over my logos, hashtag run with the pack. If you've ever seen anything that I've written, any articles, we led an expedition, we took a team, we are going, that was the way that I was taught by my mentors. And the reason that I give so much attribute to my team is because I would not be where I am without them. Would you say that you have entered this endeavor in a team-oriented manner or a solo? Is it a solo pursuit for you? Because there is value to solo pursuits. I don't want to exclude people who deal with things introvertedly or people who have taken it more solo pursuit towards life. Some of my closest friends do that, and while there are barriers, and I won't say barriers, while there are almost like an energetic barrier, like a language barrier, but it's an energetic barrier where I don't quite understand the solo pursuit, but I can respect it and know that whatever I'm not understanding is real and authentic, and I need to respect it. So I step back, but I'm always interested in learning how people take that pursuit, if it's a pack-oriented or solo-oriented, and why.
Funny you say that, because this just hit me night before last watching Peanut Butter Falcon. Great, absolutely wonderful
movie. I have no idea what that is.
And you just remember that, Peanut Butter Falcon.
That's hard to forget, yeah.
Straight from that movie, this guy says, your friends are your tribe, or your,
yes.
And it completely resonated with me because I have said on so many occasions that you have blood family, and then in life you find your tribe.
I 100% agree. We're speaking my language.
Absolutely. I mean, you gravitate towards other people that are doing the same thing, and you find whatever that is. In my case, I couldn't get the work done that I do or our organization does without our volunteer pack.
Right.
And our volunteers, to me, are selfless, endeavoring, genuine human beings that they all come out for various different reasons, and generally we can all connect on the same level. Like one of the things that I try to make sure I reiterate when we train is putting our differences aside as far as politics, religion, all of those crazy things that are dividing us right now, and bringing us together on this baseline level that we're out here for conservation. We're out
Yep.
here to do the same task and to timelessly work together towards this goal, which is conservation
Right.
of public land and wilderness specifically.
Yeah, so you're talking about community and camaraderie,
Mhm.
building that camaraderie in the tribe. And I find that to be probably the biggest pillar in my life. I would say that my friends, my tribe, is the foundation of everything that I do in my life, for sure. You mentioned something, and this would be really good for viewers. I know the answer to this, but for our viewers and for everybody watching, can you tell us the difference between an outdoor area and a wilderness area?
Ooh!
Yes.
I love that question.
Yeah. Like I said, I know what we're talking about, but for our viewers.
So, okay, that's my area of specialty.
Expertise. Yes. That's why I pulled this out. Yeah.
Well, and this is, my part of my life mission, because number one, public lands is for everybody.
Yes.
Wilderness is for everybody, but it's also for the resources, for the wild, generally, So, we have the Wilderness Preservation System, Wilderness Act of 1964, and before I just throw out legislation and Section 2C of the blah, 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 this
Which I'm
is,
sure you know.
well,
by heart.
it's
Yeah.
getting there. It gets worse every year.
Right.
Sound like Rain Man, It's an idea. So there's this idea, and I like it. And when I look back in history and over time, you see the Industrial Revolution, and there's this general response to that through art and literature and just the intellects and the academics of the time, to find a path away from that to get back to nature. There are people, 200 years ago recognizing, oh my gosh, what are we doing? We are industrializing, and this could be the beginning of a separation from our relationship with nature and humans in general, having that connection and of being not necessarily in wild places, or just being, in the wild in your backyard.
Right.
So fast forward into the 20th century, this idea of wilderness and wild was protected by, first wilderness area, the Gila Wilderness, which was the brainchild of Aldo Leopold, which I promised myself I was not going to quote.
Quote it. No, we're here for it.
Well, no, I mean, I always hardly paraphrase anyway, but so there was a tribe of people that were gravitating towards this idea, and then the actual Wilderness Act of 1964 put into place the National Wilderness Preservation System, which means that the lands that go into this are protected in perpetuity, forever and ever, amen, we hope, unless some things are not going to go there. And there are certain elements to a wilderness area that are timeless, like no mechanized equipment, and you use traditional tools, and there's a wilderness character, being untrammeled, not trampled, natural, undeveloped, opportunity for solitude and unconfined recreation, and then other features of value if they apply to that specific place.
We're not allowed to guide on wilderness areas. So
Correct.
Like,
Well, I mean, I said
for
it depends.
For money.
It depends on where you go. I mean,
Yeah.
there are certain wilderness areas that do allow that.
I just know with the Sipsey Wilderness, which is the most local to my knowledge, guiding commercially is not allowed.
Correct.
And so, there's a protection. And interestingly enough, being somebody who's, making their money off guiding commercially, I'm actually very okay with that. And so I'm a little bit torn between, I really respect that because we need to preserve nature, but,
Right.
also.
Right.
But yeah, so interestingly enough, and I wanted to get you on that topic because understanding the difference between like a land trust property and a wilderness property and the quota and the behavior there, going into that level of etiquette really approaches that dynamic. But something you were talking about, you mentioned the Industrial Revolution and you mentioned the response to that, which is art, and it kind of triggered this thought process about how, and this goes also back to the tribe, how conservation and the protection, and we use the word protection, which is, in the grand scheme of things, humans will be long gone, and nature will be fine, and so we're not really protecting it. It's going to be fine. We're no threat to it, but we're really protecting ourselves and our ability to value it. But interestingly, I think the reason that so much tribe can be found in nature and in the wilderness and in conservation and in the outdoors is because from no matter what walk of life you're from, we take our ultimate value from it because we're part of it. So industrialization takes the resources for their products from the nature. So they have a reason to conserve nature because that's where they get the resources for their products. That's how they make their livelihood. Artists, they take their inspiration from nature. Writers take their inspiration. Musicians, the tools that they use to create music and the inspiration for that music. We understand pitch mostly because of birds. And so
Yep.
From nature comes all inspiration for art and literature, and from nature comes all resources for industrialization. And this is why it can bring us together. Don't you agree?
Oh yeah. It's a very finely woven thread that it's just one thing John Muir says, if you pull on one thing, you find that it's attached to everything else, and then it can all unravel. That is how we are connected, and I think in this day and age, modern society, we have compartmentalized ourselves for many reasons away from nature. It's like, how do we get back to where we can have that relationship? It's very.
I think recognizing that we're one with it. I think the problem is we're like, oh, I love being in nature, and even down to our language. I love being in nature separates us from it. We're not acknowledging that we're a part of it. We are actually subconsciously training ourselves to believe that we are somehow separate from it, and it is something that we enjoy, or it is a concept or an idea that we hold on to. But if we recognize that we're part of it and that we have a role in it, because every other animal and organism on the planet establishes some type of equilibrium with their ecosystem, except for us. We tend to, overwhelm the resources, and then we have to move to another ecosystem. And if anybody who's seen The Matrix, this concept was explained, and we were compared to a virus. And so I think recognizing that we are part of nature, and you have different levels of consciousness. Ours just happens to be super, super high calibrated consciousness to the point where we are able to have complex thought, and we are aware of our thoughts, and we have a lot more active choice when it comes to how we establish our equilibrium with our environment, and which leads into greed and consumption and things like that. If we use that high caliber thought, that complex thought of our consciousness to establish an equilibrium and maintain that equilibrium with our environment, either take less or give more to the environment to help balance that out at scale, then we realize that we become one with it. It changes our perspective of it, and then we're no longer saving the environment. We are existing at our most natural state. Pun intended with the natural state.
Right.
Yeah.
So, one thing I'm going to throw back at you, just recently we had this, something come up where I was with a group and we basically discovered this pristine canyon out on a hike, and we go in and we find a very sustainable way to approach this canyon by backtracking, and we go up the mouth of the canyon instead of, throwing down ropes and
Right.
shimmying down into the canyon and disrupting the natural landscape. And here's this beautiful 60-foot waterfall.
Oh man.
Doesn't have a name, totally pristine canyon. And then I'm posed with this question. It's like, I want to share this, but do I? See, public lands is for everybody, but at the same time, how much do we want to put out there?
Right.
You know, and this is a conversation that I think certainly needs to be had in the community, because I think it's been misinterpreted at times that, you know, well, it's for everybody. You know, and these people are trying to keep people out, which is not the narrative. I mean, it's the fact that we found this pristine canyon that's undisturbed with no name meant, you know, it hasn't been subjugated by humans.
Right.
And if I run out and hashtag this and that, and then it ends up on Instagram,
Getting polluted, yeah.
and then it ends up on certain apps that I won't name.
Yeah.
But where is that ethic with, you know, trying to be one with nature and have that beautiful experience, or this heavily denuded
Yeah.
canyon because it's super, super popular?
And you're not the only one with that thought process. The caving world is the same way.
Yeah.
You know, cavers are super protective of their caves for multiple reasons. One, because people who don't know what they're doing can get killed in caves, and obviously we don't want people dying. You know, there's the ability to damage caves at a biological level is extremely easy. It's as simple as taking mud on your boots from one cave to a different cave. It can damage and disrupt the biological, you know, ecosystems going on in these caves. And so you're obviously protecting the area from pollution. And I wouldn't say that you're even you know, like hoarding it or, you know, for yourself. I wouldn't, but that's because I know you.
Well, it's been interpreted by certain people in our community that,
Yeah.
you know, I've received some personal attack, you know.
Naturally.
That I'm trying to be elitist and I'm trying to keep people out, and, you know, and that's my fault for even trying to fight this battle on a public forum, because
Right.
you don't have the ability to have two-way conversation. And you know, I just it's in no way trying to keep people out. It's more like trying to control what we call the on-ramping of, you know, we want people to get outdoors,
Right.
but we don't want them to get outdoors curious because they're looking at a hashtag, and then they Google it,
locate
and
this
then they
place,
find
yeah.
some crude description, and then they go out and they literally get themselves in a pickle, or they don't understand, they don't know how to maybe do their route finding, so they find a sustainable way into a pristine canyon like we did.
Yes.
You know, and it's not at all that we're trying to exclude. We want to be inclusive, but we're trying to be in a way that, you know, get some leave no trace
Proper education needs
or,
to be the channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I even sometimes shudder to use the word education, because when you say that, some people get intimidated by, you know, leave no trace
Ethics.
ethic, or, you know, trying to find a word that's not as
Not as inclusive as
condescending, and that's the way that I try very hard
I see.
not to.
See, I've never had a problem with word education, because you know, and this comes from a place of, you know, like, slaughter the ego, and, you know,
Mhm.
like, you should always be learning, and that's my rule number 5 of my 5 rules that I follow is, you know, always be a student, always be learning. So I would say, I think we need to, if we're not already kind of going through a mass cultural shift towards the terms, towards being educated and learning more. You know, you see people well past, you know, 18 to 22, which is like the standard college range, going back to school and studying more. Some of my mentors in the outdoor world are well into the 30s and 40s, run $100,000 businesses and are still taking classes. You know,
yeah.
so
I consider myself a
you know,
life learner.
Absolutely.
And even if it means shutting down my outdoor, or my not outdoor, my I kind of retreat, or I get a little reclusive sometimes because I'm busy
Yeah.
internally scoping situations and being like, and I question myself, and I will own up to something if I feel like, maybe that wasn't the best such and such, or, and I'm always on this self-edit, I guess.
Right.
And it's hard to be in a position of leadership, which I'm in, and how my but just kind of my presence in the community over the years has become strong, and
Yes.
people know my name, and sometimes I'm trying to diffuse what the general public might think.
Yeah,
I am.
so Kate Griffin's one of my best friends, and I try to stay a step or two ahead of her, just to tease her. And it's funny because I was telling her about this episode and how I was bringing you, and she just started laughing, and she was just like, "Yeah, I'm thinking about doing a project and calling Kim too." And so if you get a call from Kate, just let her know I gave you a heads up. I'm not gonna say that. Yeah, it's just like, hey, she's mine first. So I'm not gonna say what the project is because I don't want to spoil it.
Sure.
But it's cool. So you've been working with Wild South for well over a decade. You've been a Leave No Trace master educator. You've led a lifestyle of being in the outdoors. So in this industry, what would you, and obviously you've kind of already expressed a little bit, like these public forums that you're discussing things on, you're trying to come to a consensus with the community between morality and legality. And then your job as a volunteer coordinator, I know how frustrating that can be because I make my living off of event planning, and and depending on volunteers, who have little to no incentive other than what's inside their own heart most of the time. I'm sure Wild South is a great organization to volunteer for, and I'm sure there's great incentives with that. But what would you say a stressful day for work? A stressful day at work looks like for you?
Oh my goodness. It depends on what I'm doing, and I won't go into administrative frustrations because that's just timeless across the board.
Absolutely.
Like,
sure, no.
Anybody that knows
I'm sure any secretary
office
or
work,
bookkeeper can keep up.
there's
Yeah.
just, par for the course totally through that. But being out in the woods, a frustrating day, and just a shout out to my team, our wilderness rangers who give of their time and are just absolutely selfless, and that's what I was. I was a volunteer. I still consider myself a volunteer wilderness ranger, although I'm on the payroll. But we'll go out on a ranger patrol, and our mission basically is just give some general information to people on the trails. We talk a little Leave No Trace. Just making sure. And it's not because we want to jump out from behind a tree and be like, "Look what you're doing." It's more to be informative because I want everybody to have a good time outside. I don't want anybody to show up in the woods and be like, "Oh, I didn't know that." So we're kind of ambassadors, but we've been out there before and ran into. I have personally come across people carving their initials on a tree.
Mm-hmm.
So as a ranger, how do I approach that? And there is a technique, authority of the resource, which is more a way of expressing a situation in terms of where hopefully that person can come to their own conclusion on where the behavior needs to change.
Yes.
It's kind of this
Psychology
Jedi
of
mind
guiding,
trick, man.
Yeah, guiding them to the solution.
And it's not. Hey, I'm about to write you a ticket.
See, I worked in a psychiatric hospital for a year. I know exactly what you're talking about, guiding them to the solution. So tell me more about that.
So, the technique.
Yes.
Yeah, authority of the resource. It was. It's basically, you might start telling the story of what's going on the land. Hey, we've noticed that there have been some tree carvings here lately, although this person that I caught was red-handed, so I kind of just jumped into the situation. And just talk about, that's unfortunate because, the bark of a tree is kind of its protective layer, and, you can introduce disease into a tree when and it's just then once you've put that into motion, then they're like, oh, and they might not admit it out loud that they're the ones that cut the tree, but you walk away, and then they might know. So, you know,
Right.
it's so frustrating day, you know, finding somebody carving a tree. I think my record of smoldering campfires was 12 in one day, you know, and one of the fires actually being, you know, flames up to my knees. And we had a 5,000 acre wildfire, which is small in the grand scheme of things in eastern wilderness. But it still meant a lot to our wilderness community, and we still don't know what started it. It could have been lightning, but there might have been
smoldering campfire.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know, wildfires are the majority of them are human caused.
Right.
So.
What does a successful day at work look like for you?
Oh man,
Like, what's your ideal day? Like, how do you define success in your conservation? Because conservation is a long-term outcome, and that's one of the things that a lot of people who want to get involved in conservation struggle with. They love the notion, but if they are short-term goal-oriented people, if they like seeing success, you know, from the day to day, I've seen people who can work on a project that they know is going to take 10 years to complete, and they're totally fine. But I also see people who do a lot better, and this comes down to self-awareness, and so I hope our viewers are really getting this, especially if you're of the age, or any age, where you're deciding on a career, or you're not sure about your career satisfaction, or your hobby satisfaction, or anything to do with relationships, is that, you know, you have people who take satisfaction and deep fulfillment out of long-term projects, and they can work long-term projects without seeing a definitive outcome for years.
Yeah.
And then you have people who are very, very short-term goal-oriented, and they need to see a finished project every day, or every 2 days, or at least once a week, where they can look and see and get the reward of those short-term projects. Which there's no way to really scale the importance of a short-term project and a long-term project. You know, a short-term project people might associate with being less important, but me stopping somebody's bleeding is a short-term project. Off of which, once I've successfully stopped their bleeding as a medic, I get that satisfaction of, hey, I achieved my project. And that's a really important project. Versus long-term projects like, you know, designing a layout for, you know, a forestry plan to replant trees, you know, which is obviously much longer. You know, environmental sustainability tends to be a lot more long-term.
Right.
So for a successful day for you, in a field where typically, I guess I have two questions. Typically is a long-term project. How do you find your success, your day-to-day accomplishment, or your week-to-week accomplishments?
So I can give you two examples, and I'll give you one short-term and one long-term.
Perfect.
Okay, so short-term project, we need volunteers and boots on the ground to do a reroute of a trail. This is something that's already happened, but more sort of hypothetical because it's happened on more than one occasion. You know, we're in a floodplain area on the Sipsey Fork, and a particular trail is, over the years, sometimes parts of it will completely wash out. The whole embankment will the trail will be gone. So in the course of one day, you know, we might have 6 or 8 people on a team, and we go out, we reroute the trail. That means we have to do a new trail bed around an area. It's safe for people, and it's good on the resource. So, you know, that day looks like we have a specific objective. Most of the time I've already been out there to scout it out, and I've mapped where the reroute needs to go, and I've confirmed with the Forest Service that it's okay to do said reroute. So there's some pre-planning involved, and then we get out there and then we actually do it. And then the group that we engage is always, you know, definitive outcome. We get the work done, and then the group that we have out there might be people that have never volunteered before, or never thought they could, or bringing them into this conservation-minded. We're doing this not only for humans, but it's also for the resource. You know, that's the duality of conservation. There's a little bit for everybody there.
Right.
And long-term goal, specifically for the Sipsey, and just something just glaringly stands out in my mind. If we have been removing non-native invasive Chinese privet in a certain watershed for about 7 or 8 years.
Tell our viewers what that is.
In Chinese privet. So it is a non-native understory evergreen shrub that was brought to America for erosion control on homesteads and forage for goats and livestock. And I don't think that the ones who brought it over here knew exactly how easily it reproduces. I mean, it reproduces by berries and stems, and you can look at it the wrong way and it's going to reproduce.
Right.
Blow on it and it reproduces. So, and so what it ends up doing is it crowds out the native plants. And especially in a wilderness area, when one of your characteristics is supposed to be protected by law is the natural quality. And if you have something that is affecting the natural quality, you might have to step in and trammel a little bit to get something done. There's this conflict, this untrammeled versus natural conflict that, you know, you're actually trammeling by performing that action, but the end result, the end justifies the means. So you end up.
I'm just thinking all of the different ways that can apply to different situations.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Oh man.
It's an interesting thing to work through in your mind, but it's specifically for this project. There is a bend in the creek, kind of where you walk in on Thompson Creek, and then there's White Oak Creek confluence. There's a confluence with a couple of creeks here, and a huge floodplain that just used to be, all it was privet. So we've been removing this privet. We're about 2 miles in, but this one area, every time we walk by it now, it is native wildflowers. In spring ephemerals, you're going to have your mayapple and rue anemone, hepatica, Virginia bluebells. All those beautiful native wildflowers are now back because of our efforts, and that's been a more long term. So that's a definitive thing that you can see from our actions.
That is incredible. Thank you. So you can list off the plants, and you can list off especially in your native area where you work. But there are obviously a lot of different niches to a niche. So conservation itself is a small niche right now, even though it shouldn't be. It is a small niche, and in there are even more niches. You have wilderness conservation, you have cave conservation, you have cliff conservation, river conservation, animals, you have different species, and you can get into the subspecies and very, very specific on which endangered species. You can do reptiles as a whole, or you can do a specific reptile, and so there's all these different niches of conservation. How would you encourage people who are struggling to find their niche?
So,
because conservation is overwhelming.
You posted on your Facebook page the other day an Alan Watts quote, and
yes, I love Alan
Watts. And it made me think of a video that I saw that was taking some of his writing and putting in this beautiful montage of imagery, and it was the title of it was "What If Money Were No Object?" And it talks about what makes you tick. What is that thing that you look back to when you were a child. Was it birds that you loved, or and then you forgot about it because life got in the way, and there you sit 20 years later and you're trying to find something to make you feel good about the world, and and then you're, oh, okay, yeah, man, I really love bald eagles. Something about bald eagles, it might take a little bit of meditative practice, but you think about that.
What's that meditative practice like for you? What's that process for you? I'll take a rabbit trail down
lighting a fire in my wood stove and staring at it.
Yes. Okay.
Until the embers speak to me, and they do really.
Yes.
No drugs involved.
Okay. Good.
But yeah, just thinking about the things that you really got passionate about, you were drawn to mentally, and then I guess also looking at what is your skill set or what is your physical capabilities. You're not going to go rappel down a cliff face to conserve falcon nests if you don't have any experience, you know, unless you want to learn them. You can't learn it.
Develop,
you know? Yeah. It's kind of a little pulling for everything. You know, I once thought that I was gonna be a caver and go far, and then I learned my limitations the hard way. You know?
You've been in a cave with me.
Plenty.
Yeah, you came on my caving expedition. It was my first one. Did you know that? That was not the first time I've ever been on a cave expedition.
Gotcha.
Not the first time I've ever led an expedition.
Right.
But that was the first time I have led a caving expedition.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So you got to join me for my first one.
Yeah.
And you made it out alive before everybody else, if I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I actually discovered my love for conservation was a really accidental discovery. I was working in the medical field. I worked in a psychiatric hospital in Daytona Beach. I got burnt out on that and decided to go, do the 21-year-old thing and run zipline tours. And I just happened to be running zipline tours at the alligator farm in St. Augustine, and the zip lines would go over the alligator enclosures. And I loved that, and it was incredible, and I learned. But interestingly, while I was there, we would entertain our guests because we would follow them around on the ground. We'd point out different crocodiles in it, and they would tip us if we learned this. And there was me and one other guy, and we would always get tipped because we would learn the different crocodiles' names, and we would be able to tell them that there are 24 species of crocodilian that can be broken into 4 major categories: alligators, crocodiles, caimans, and gharials. And we could tell you all about the different ones and why they act that way, and about the difference between an ambush predator and apex predator. And so we learned that, and I would make money off of that because I wasn't getting paid very much, and so I would earn tips from these people who were vacationing in St. Augustine because I gave them an experience. But during the colder months or during the rainy days when we didn't have people running the zip lines, they had to justify paying us because capitalism wins. And so we would go help out with the reptile departments or the bird and mammal departments, and I got to work in conservation for a whopping like $9 an hour. I got to work with some of the coolest animals side by side with zookeepers, and these zookeepers spent their like 4 years and $40,000 going to school, and I'm sitting right next to them doing exactly what they're doing just because I happen to run zipline tours in the place, and I fell in love with it, and that's where I discovered that I really loved conservation. And so when I made that transition from recreational guiding to conservation, that was a very conscious decision that I had already made before I even went into it, and it was about learning how to get involved, and I've been super blessed with the people that I've got to meet and work with. So I agree with you on when you find that niche, it's really about finding that passion and meditating and starting where you're at. I like that you mentioned you could develop those skills, but also don't be afraid to get started where you're at. You don't know how to rappel to get to a falcon's nest? That's fine. You know how to get to a ladder to get to another type of bird's nest in a tree. So you can start there. I would say. I know there are like some particularities on handling nests and your scent and things like that.
Oh yeah.
So definitely want to do our research. So for people who are working to find their niche and for people who are working to get involved, what are some of the larger nationwide platforms that you're aware of and that you would recommend people can look to start getting involved? I always tell them, hey, look at the Land Trust. Land Trust has been a partner of mine since I started in this industry, and I love the North Alabama Land Trust. I do a lot of work with them. I'm super excited to always email them with new ideas. They usually let us, they give us some guidance and stuff to make sure we're following protocols, but they let us do the work that we need to do. It's really a beautiful experience. Other than Wild South.org, if you're in the South, where would you point people?
Well, we are certainly not exclusive. We are a volunteer-driven organization, but by no means do we expect people to be loyal to us. There are many other organizations out there doing good work. To volunteer specifically, I would just, within a 60-mile radius of your home, there's Friends of Locust Fork River, and they do a lot of cleanups, and this is more, East Blount County, that area, or just, go to websites like Birmingham, Greater Birmingham area. you have Ruffner Mountain Nature Preserve and Turkey Creek, Friends of Turkey Creek. There's Red Mountain Park. Thinking of, as far as the Bankhead National Forest, there are a few other groups. There's one up-and-coming group called Watchers of the Wilderness, and there is the Sipsey Wilderness Hiking Club, and gosh, that's as far as stewardship. Now, there are other conservation platforms, of course. Alabama Rivers Alliance, for one, is in the state of Alabama. Cahaba River Society, and Cahaba River Keeper. I can't keep up with them. I would just start Googling and looking at these websites. I think as far as the amount of volunteer work, the Wild South is kind of in the leader in the area. Okay. But that's because that's what we do. I mean,
it's
that's
because
like,
you run it. No.
well, not necessarily, but there are other groups that might focus a lot more on legislative action and advocacy,
legislation, and fundraising.
Yeah. And then they might have a few volunteer events. Now, if you are a trail person and you really want to learn the ropes of trail stewardship and might possibly want to do seasonal trail work, there's Southern Appalachian Wilderness
I have
Tours.
looked into it, honestly. I've considered it a couple times just as a resume builder and just for the experience. But, I think I got involved after I acquired debt, after I acquired certain responsibilities and things like that. So that's going to be a different path if I take that one.
Mm-hmm.
So how can people get involved in your organization? Assuming that they're local, or if they are not local?
They can go on our website, wildsouth.org. They can email me directly, Kim, Kim, at wildsouth.org. We do, so generally, but we can think outside of this box and create any kind of special event for anybody. We lead free guided hikes on the first and last Saturday of every month. The third Saturday.
I need to start pointing people in your direction, because I get a lot of people who sign up for my hikes and then they call me when they get the invoice and they're like, I thought this was free, and I always point them towards the land trust, because people deserve to be able to go on free guided hikes, and we do offer some free guided hikes as well. Mm-hmm. But I need to start pointing them your way now that I know that you do that the first and last
Saturday of the month.
First and last Saturday of the month.
And then the third Saturday is our monthly stewardship trail, but we can do, I've worked with homeschool groups to do special either cleanup, or somebody needs community service hours. I've gone out during the week with a couple of people. I've led hikes for certain groups that I've popped up on Facebook, and they've contacted me and said, hey, will you lead a hike for our little group that we have on Facebook? And I'm like, okay, sure. And then there is sort of a skeletal baseline of what we do, but then depending on my schedule and my work partner's schedule, we can do special things for people.
So
sure.
run your website and your email by us one last time. Okay. Any other ways that you'd like for people to be able to get in touch with you?
Wildsouth.org.
Yep.
Email Kim, Kim, at wildsouth.org.
Okay.
And just start a conversation. And I'm really good at answering email. Probably too dialed into my phone sometimes.
Right. I know.
I'm going backpacking this weekend. I'm going to be I'm taking 6 of our volunteer wilderness rangers on a one-night backpacking trip. So we're going to be unplugged and doing good work this weekend.
Right. So we mentioned your mission statement, to really inspire for the enjoyment and valuing and protection of the wilderness areas of the South. Mm-hmm. How do you hope that your mission affects the world?
It's a consciousness shift. You have to start small.
I love that.
And there's this microcosm, and then there's the macrocosm.
Yes.
And consciousness shift changes in very tiny. It starts with tiny. your elements of fire, tinder, kindling, and fuel. It's got to start with the tinder, and then that's going to ignite everything else.
I love this. Thank you so much. Yeah, everybody, this is Kim Waits from Wild South Org. She's joined us for our first episode of the Conservation Journal. Again, I'm your host, Matt Ward. You can reach me on Instagram at Matt with 2 T's, K Ward. That's Matt K Ward. Or you can reach us on Facebook at Alpha Expeditions. We hope that you guys can stay in touch with us. Until next time, go out. Thank you so much. It's great to have you out.